hey, how about this? You know, the president comes out with a budget, and Paul Ryan and the Republicans, they all come out with their proposal, and yeah, hey, they want to raise the minimum wage by $2 an hour, take it back to where it was in the 1960s. Oh, they didn't? Well, wait a minute. I thought Paul Ryan said that he was going to do that because it might help bring the president to the table and make it by. Oh, he didn't say that? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, the Republicans say that they want to lower the retirement age from 67. Now it is pretty much for all practical purposes back down to 65, and maybe even down to 60. It would tighten up the labor market. It would actually increase wages, increase tax collections. It would probably pay for it. Oh, they don't want to do that? The Republicans don't want to meet the president halfway. They don't want to. But I thought that they would bring him to the table. You know, eventually they're going to have the White House. They should get this stuff out, get ready, meet him in the middle. They said I should do what? Okay, never mind. You can't say that on the radio. So I understand that the Republicans are in support, in response, in a bipartisan effort, in support of Nancy Pelosi's proposal from 4 years ago. It actually passed the House of Representatives to do away with the tax cuts and the tax breaks for big corporations that send our jobs overseas and replace them with tax breaks and tax cuts for companies that bring our jobs back home, because after all, we should have more people working here at home. And the Republicans thought this was a great place to start in a compromise with the Oh, they didn't? No. Okay. Well, how about that rumor that's out there that Mitch McConnell and Eric Cantor and John Boehner, that they're willing to do away with the oil depletion allowance and this special bonuses that for over 100 years the oil industry's gotten, so they don't have to pay taxes and so they can be billionaire. They're not going to do that? No. Okay. President Obama, if I may address you directly. Sir, you were a child when it happened, so it's probably not surprising that you don't know about it, and probably most of your staff doesn't because they were probably children too. I was in my 20s. But I want to make sure that you do know this, because if what I'm hearing about this budget, I've read it, you have put your foot into a trap that was laid for you before you even graduated from high school. Back in the 1970s, after Richard Nixon went down in flames, and with him the entire Republican Party, I remember my dad running around going, this is it, the Republicans are doomed. A Republican strategist by the name of Jude Wanniski had an inspiration. The Democrats, he said, had always been the party of Santa Claus. They gave the American people what they wanted. Social Security, unemployment compensation, medical help, minimum wage, free public education, inexpensive public hospitals, unions, environmental protections, child labor laws, workplace protection, paid vacations, sick days. Meanwhile, the Republicans had always been the party of Scrooge. They'd said no to every one of those things over and over and over again. And the American people knew it, which is why the Republicans did not control the House of Representatives for over 40 years in my lifetime. And a Democrat who was really good at playing Santa Claus, and this was slightly before my lifetime. He died before I was born, but, you hear the stories. He was really good at playing Santa Claus, FDR. He got elected four times as president. So Jude said Republicans have to figure out two things. First, they have to somehow become Santa Claus. That's what the American people want. And second, and perhaps most important, they have to figure out a way to force the Democrats to shoot their own Santa Claus so the Republicans can replace the Democrats as the party of Santa Claus. The Republicans all said, come on, what are you talking about? We're the party of no. No, Jude says, this is going to be simple. Just cut taxes and then borrow and spend lots and lots of money. Millions, billions, trillions. Everybody loves tax cuts. The average person wouldn't realize you're only giving them, $50 a year in tax cuts, even though you're giving the millionaires and billionaires hundreds of thousands or millions. They don't know. All they know is they got $50 more in their paycheck. It's a tax cut, right? Santa Claus Republicans. And on the spending side, come up with a lot of things you can spend a lot of money on fast. It'll stimulate the economy. More Santa. Star Wars, Medicare Part D, wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. But wait, said some Republicans. If we do that, we're going to end up with huge budget deficits. That's the genius of it, Jude said. If Republicans can run up huge budget deficits, they can then, when a Democrat becomes president, force him to shoot the Democratic Santa by cutting their own programs. And of course, the biggest of the Santa programs is Social Security. Republicans laughed at Jude back in the 70s. No Democratic president would ever cut Social Security, they said. First off, it's separate from the rest of the budget, so cutting it won't help the budget. And second, it's the Democrats' ultimate Santa Claus badge of honor. Said Jude, if you make the deficits big enough, and if you yell loud enough and long enough, and you pay off a bunch of shills, especially old ex-Democrats like, maybe Erskine Bowles, some other fool like that, some sucker of a Democratic president will someday come along and cut Social Security. When Jude Boninsky published this back in the 1970s, everybody, including my dad, thought it was bat guano crazy. Everybody except Ronald Reagan, who put the policy into practice. And sure enough, he borrowed trillions. He spent it like a drunken sailor. He created the appearance of good times, just like you or I could if we had a credit card with $1 million line of credit on it that we'd never have to pay off. And they created a huge deficit, the biggest in the history of America. So when Clinton came in, immediately, hey, Jude Boninsky 101, start shooting Santa Claus. Come on, Clinton, take out Social Security. But Clinton was too smart for him. Instead of taking out Social Security, he just cut funds to poor people. Nobody noticed. Nobody gives a rat's patootie about poor people. He ended welfare as we know it. But there was no way that Clinton was going to fall into Jude's trap. Bush W. came along next. He went back to Jude's playbook. Borrow and spend trillions. Drugs for Medicare. The government can't even negotiate discounts in the drug companies. Wars. Forget about fighting wars with a cheap soldier making $20,000 a year. Hire a contractor from Halliburton or Blackwater and pay him $1 million per person per year. After all, these companies are owned by investment companies like the Carlyle Group that the Bush family buddies and Poppy invested in. Huge deficits, not a single word about it. Instead, what did Bush say to us? Remember 9/11? What did Bush say to us? Go shopping! Then came Obama. Again, the Republicans who had held Jude's flame rolled out their demands. Democrats must shoot Santa Claus, particularly the biggest Democratic Santa of all, Social Security. Most of the Democrats laughed at them. 4 years we laughed at them. That's stupid. Social Security doesn't even add to the budget deficit. In fact, it has a $2.7 trillion surplus. Cut it anyway, demanded the Republicans and their shills like Erskine Bowles, knowing that if they could get the Democrats to shoot their biggest Santa, then over 80 years of people's faith in the Democratic Party would be lost. It's a high-stakes game. So now, President Obama, we hear that you're talking about shooting Santa Claus. If you do, you'll be the first Democratic president to ever do it, and you may destroy the Democratic Party. I know you love Doris Kearns Goodwin, the movie Lincoln, with all that talk about compromise. It's a very different kind of compromise in a very different time with very different men. And personally, I think Doris put a hell of a lot too much emphasis on compromise. It was a nice story, but Lincoln took names and kicked ass. He was the great fighter, not the great compromise.